When the Canadian Film Development Corporation started to support and produce and supply funding to Canadian productions, in a million years, I never thought I'd say this, but I became a producer because I paid taxes like the more than 20 million Canadians who were alive in 1979. I helped produce this movie. I'm saying, I'm going to tell you straight out, if I had known where my money was going, I would have put more money towards this movie because it's a classic. And if you're ever thinking about getting divorced, you better watch this movie. Of course, we're going to be talking about Cronenberg's classic, The Brood. Now, The Brood is a 1979 Canadian psychological body horror film written and directed by the great David Cronenberg and starred the great Oliver Reed, one of my personal favorites as an actor, Samantha Agar, and the poor man's Oliver Reed in Canada, Art Hindle. Its plot follows a man and his mentally ill ex-wife who has been sequestered by a psychiatrist known for his controversial therapy techniques. In this movie, a series of brutal unsolved murders serve as a backdrop for the central narrative. Written by Cronenberg after his own nasty divorce, he intended the screenplay as a meditation on a fractured relationship between a husband and wife who share a child. And Cass Agar, who was a very beautiful actress inside and out, and Hindle as loose facsimiles of himself and his ex-wife. He will later state that, despite its incorporation of science fiction elements, he considered it as the sole feature that most embodied a classic horror film. Principal photography of The Brood took place in late 78 in Toronto on a budget of Canadian money $1.5 million, which would be maybe $1.2 million American. The film score was composed by former Saturday Night Live composer Howard Shore in his film composing debut. Now, released in the spring of 1979 by New World Pictures in its early days, The Brood proved profitable for the studio, grossing over $5 million US. Though initially received positive reviews from critics, it would establish itself as a cult film in the following decades. It has attracted scholarly interest from academics in the areas of film history for its themes ranging from mental illness to lapsed parenthood. In 2006, the Chicago Film Critics Association named it the 88th scariest film of all time. In 2013, it got the Criterion restoration, which subsequently released it on Blu-ray. Now, in the movie, psychotherapist Hal Raglan runs the Summer-Free Institute of Psychoplasmics, where he encourages patients with mental disturbances to let go of their suppressed emotions through psychological changes to their bodies in a technique he calls psychoplasmics. One of his patients is Nola Cavert, a severely disturbed woman who was legally embattled with her husband Frank for custody of their 5-year-old daughter, Candace. When Frank discovers bruises and scratches on Candace following a visit with Nola, he informs Raglan of his intent to stop visitation. Wanting to protect his patient, Raglan begins to intensify the sessions with Nola to resolve the issue quickly. During the therapy sessions, he discovers that Nola was physically and verbally abused by her self-pitying alcoholic mother while neglected by her codependent alcoholic father, who refused to protect Nola out of shame and denial. Meanwhile, Frank, intending to invalidate the Raglan's methods, questions Jan Hartog, a former Summer-Free Institute patient who is dying of psychoplasmic-induced lymphoma. Frank leaves Candace with her paternal grandmother, Juliana, and the two spend the evening viewing old photographs. Juliana tells Candace that Nola was frequently hospitalized as a child and often exhibit strange unexplained wheals on her skin that doctors were unable to diagnose. While in the kitchen, Juliana is attacked and bludgeoned to death by a small dwarf-like child. Candace is traumatized but physically unharmed. Now Juliana's ex-husband Barton returns for the funeral and attempts to contact Nola at the Summer-Free Institute, but Raglan turns him away. Frank invites Candace's teacher, Ruth Mayer, home for dinner to discuss his daughter's performance in school. Barton interrupts with a drunken phone call from Juliana's home, demanding that Frank and he go to the Summer-Free Institute to see Nola. Frank leaves to calm Barton, leaving Candace's in Ruth's care. While he's away, Ruth answers a phone call from Nola, who, recognizing her voice and believing her to be having an affair with Frank, insults her and angrily warns Ruth to stay away from her family. Meanwhile, Frank arrives to find Barton murdered by the same deformed dwarf child, who dies after attempting to kill Frank. Now, the police autopsy of the dwarf child reveals a multitude of bizarre anatomical anomalies. The creature is asexual, supposedly colorblind, naturally toothless, and devoid of a navel, indicating no known means of natural human birth. After the murder story reaches the newspapers, Raglan reluctantly acknowledged that the deaths coincided with his sessions with Nola, relating to the respective topics. He closes the Summer Free Institute and sends his patients to municipal care, with the exception of Nola. Frank is alerted about the closure of the institute by Hartog. Mike Trellan, one of the patients forced to leave the institute, tells Frank that Nola is now Raglan's queen bee and in charge of some disturbed children in an attic. When Candace returns to school, two dwarf children attack and kill Ruth in front of her class before absconding with Candace to the Summer Free Institute, with Frank in pursuit. Upon arriving at the institute, Raglan tells Frank the truth about the dwarf children. They are the accidental product of Nola's psychoplasmic sessions. Her rage about the abuse was so strong that she pathologically bore a brood of creatures resembling children who physically respond and act on the targets of her rage, with Nola completely unaware of their actions. Yeah, that's what you want to have in your family. Realizing the brood are too dangerous to keep anymore, Raglan plans to venture into their quarters and rescue Candace, providing that Frank can keep Nola calm to avoid provoking the children. Now, Frank attempts feigned rapprochement long enough for Raglan to collect Candace, but when he witnesses Nola give birth to another child through a psychoplasmically induced external womb, and the body licking off scene cannot be described here without making you all sick, but you have to see it to believe it. She notices disgust again when she licks the child clean. The brood awakens and kills Raglan. Nola then threatens to kill Candace rather than lose her. The brood goes after Candace, who hides in a closet, but the brood, in one of the most famous scenes in Canadian movie history, begins to break through the door and tries to grab her. In desperation, Frank strangles Nola to death, and the brood dies without its mother's psychic connection. Frank carries the visually traumatized Candace back to his car, and the two depart. As the pair sit in silence, two small lesions, a germinal stage of the phenomena experienced by Nola, appear on Candace's arm. Now, the cast has some great Canadian actors in it that still are getting work to this day, but let's go over the main cast. The very, very talented Nicholas Campbell as Chris, Larry Solway as lawyer, Robert A. Silverman as Jane Hartog, Michael McGee as inspector, Cindy Hines as Candace Carvett, Gary McEnany as Mike Trelane, Susan Hogan as Ruth Meyer, Henry Beckman as Barton Kelly, Nuala Fitzgerald as Juliana Kelly, of course Art Hindle as Frank Cavart, Samantha Eggar as Nola Cavart, and Oliver Reed as Dr. Hal Raglan, the evil of the piece. Now, in retrospect, the screenplay, he said, The Brood is my version of Kramer versus Kramer, but more realistic. He's felt The Brood was the most classic horror film I've ever done in terms of structure. He conceived the screenplay in the aftermath of his divorce, and again the bitter custody battle over his daughter. During his divorce, Cronenberg became aware of the drama Kramer vs. Kramer and was disillusioned by his optimistic depiction of a familial breakdown after the couple's separation. In response, he began writing the screenplay for The Brood, aspiring to depict a strife between the divorced couple battling over their child. There's no indication if Cronenberg gave some of the profits to his soon-to-be ex-wife. Now, in casting the roles of Frank and Nola Cavert, Cronenberg sought actors who were vague facsimiles of himself and his wife. The very talented and award-winning Canadian actor Art Hindle was cast in the role of Frank, while English actress Samantha Eggar was cast as Nola. Oliver Reed was cast as Hal, the psychologist who kept Nola sequestered after divorce from Frank. This marked the second time Eggar and Reed had starred the film together, having previously co-starred in The Lady in the Car with Glasses and a Gun some 9 years before. Additionally, Eggar and Reed had known one another personally, having grown up together in Bledlow, England. Eggar was impressed by Cronenberg's screenplay and agreed to appear in the film, as she felt the role of Nola was almost Shakespearean. How can you turn this part down? Now again, principal photography, November 1478, took about a month and a half to film, especially at the Courtright Center for Conservation, just north of Toronto, was used as a location as a Summer Free Institute. Initial photography was done in Mississauga at a 1.5 million Canadian budget. Now, Eggar recalled the production crew being very small, with only around 7 crew members in total while she was filming her sequences, many of them academics and PhDs, standing there holding lights. Her scenes were shot over a period of 3 days. To portray the brood of children, Cronenberg cast a group of child gymnasts from Toronto. There's no indication that they've ever reunited. Scared the living shit out of me, I know that. Now again, Howard Shore was his first ever score. Shore's work consists in a composition for chamber orchestra, strongly reminiscent of the second Viennese school's Arnold Schoenberg, Alban Berg, and Anton Werben. The technically difficult score by Shore is performed by professional players. Shore had written the music for all but one of Cronenberg's subsequent films. Now, censorship problems, Canadian censors, Quebec centers. The Brood had cuts demanded for an R rating for its theatrical release in the States. Edgar on conceiving the idea of licking the new fetuses that her character Nola Carvette had spawned. I just thought that when cats have their kittens or dogs, or dogs have puppies, and I think at a time I had about 8 dogs, they lick them as soon as they're born. Lick, 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 Edgar said. However, when a climactic scene was censored, Cronenberg responded, I had a long and loving close-up of Samantha licking the fetus. When the censors, those animals, cut it out, the result was that a lot of people thought she was eating her baby. That's much worse than it was suggesting. Now, The Brood, again, was released in North America, June 1st, 1979. After screenings in Toronto and Chicago, it grossed $685,000 over only a period of 10 days between the two cities, but didn't get a wide release because it was freaking too many people out. By 1981, the film had grossed over $5 million, mostly on midnight circuit. Of the review aggregatory website Rotten Tomatoes, The Brood holds an 81% approval rating based on 27 critic reviews, with an average rating of 7.5. I give it around there, 3 stars out of 4. The consensus reads, The Brood is a grotesque, squirming, hilariously shrill exploration of the bizarre and deadly side of motherhood. No mention of divorce. Probably written by either a frustrated woman or a frustrated man. While Variety called it an extremely well-made, if essentially unpleasant shocker, Leonard Maltin reviewed the film in 2 sentences. Edgar eats her own afterbirth while midget clones beat grandparents and lovely young school teachers to death with mallets. It's a big, wide, wonderful world we live in, and rated it an outright bomb. Leonard Maltin should not have been allowed to review this movie at all. Now, Roger Ebert, who didn't get the movie, and he doesn't really like Canadian movies, called it a bore and disgusting in ways that are not entertaining, as opposed, for example, to the great disgusting moments in Alien or Dawn of the Dead, and even went as far as asking, are there really people who want to see reprehensible trash like this? Concluding with, I guess so, it's in its second week. Writing for the Vancouver Sun, Von Palmer, not a very good critic, lambasted the film, referring to it as a mean, foul, and witless. The people who made The Brood do not like people. They do not even appear to like themselves. They just like money. There was no indication when that movie's being released it would even make 5 cents. Okay? Because Cronenberg made movies before, and it was middling box office receipts. They had to use a porn star in one of these movies to get even the movie release. Now, Kevin Thomas, LA Times, praised the film as well made and expertly acted, but criticized his depictions of violence, stating, perhaps Cronenberg means to make an extreme comment upon the irresponsibility of psychiatrists and parents, but The Brood is so totally sickening, it's an irresponsible work itself. Now, in cult movies, Danny Perry, who openly disapproves of Cronenberg's Shivers and Rabbit, his 2 previous movies, called The Brood Cronenberg's best film because he cares about the characters. And although he dislikes the ending, an hour and a half of absorbing solid cinema, in his an introduction to the American horror film, critic Robin Wood views The Brood as a reactionary work portraying feminine power as irrational and horrifying, and the dangerous attempts of Oliver Reed's character's psychoanalysis as an analog to the dangers of trying to undo repression in society. Now, The Brood was listed 88 on the Chicago Film Critics Association 100 Scariest Movies of All Time. In 2004, one of his sequences was voted number 78 in the 100 Scariest Movie Moments by the Bravo channel. Now, home media. The film was released on DVD in its original uncensored version by MGM on my birthday, August 26, 2003. Anchor Bay Entertainment subsequently released the film on DVD in the United Kingdom in 2005. In mid-2013, the Criterion Collection added The Brood, as well as scanners, to the selection of films available to Hulu and iTunes customers. The film was subsequently reissued on DVD and Blu-ray by Criterion on October 13, 2015, featured a new 2K scan of the original film elements. Now, a novelization by Richard Starks was published to coincide with the film's initial release. In 2009, Spyglass Entertainment announced a remake from a script by Corey Goodman to to be directed by Breck Eisner, but Eisner left the project in 2010. Now, written in the aftermath of writer-director Cronenberg's divorce from his wife, The Brood has been noted by critics and film scholars for its prominent themes surrounding fears of parenthood, as well as corollary preoccupations with repression and the treatment of mental illness in women. Now, film theorist Barbara Creed notes that Nola's parthenogenic births are thematically used to demonstrate the horrors of unbridled maternal power, in which a woman gives birth to deformed manifestations of herself. Scholar Sarah Arnold similarly suggests that despite Nola's apparent representation as a bad mother, epitomizing the monstrous feminine, The Brood does not disseminate such images unproblematically, and instead questions these already cultural and socially pre-existing notions of the material in motherhood. The film fuses the concerns of the women's film with that of the body horror film. Now, feminist critic Carrie Rickey notes that many of Cronenberg's films, The Brood has been accused of presenting a misogynist representation of women. However, Rickey argues that against this assertion, writing for me, Cronenberg's gynophobia is a non-issue, it's blaming the victim. After all, aren't we talking about movies where male scientists use women as guinea pigs and then are shocked when the test subjects become monstrous, voracious, etc.? Let me invoke the Jessica Rabbit defense. The women are not bad, they're just drawn that way. It's the male scientists who inadvertently transferred them into men's worst nightmare. Well, I can tell you, as a movie critic and essayist, if you had a group of 150 people in a room, a cross-section of genders, male, female, non-binary, gay, pansexual, drag queens, asexual, each one would look at The Brood differently. When I first saw The Brood, I said, oh, this is interesting. Oliver Reed plays a horror villain because in, Bird Offerings, he played like a victim, right? So I said to myself, okay, you got Art Hindle in there. Nothing bad's going to happen, because usually Art Hindle, he was the hero of that hockey movie in the early 70s. He played, the hero of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But when the movie started getting going, you're saying to yourself, what in the hell happened between Cronenberg and his wife to come up with this? Instead of just doing a Canadian version of Kramer versus Kramer, where they would be fighting over the hockey sticks, he basically created a movie that the main 3 scenes in the movie, where she gives birth to her baby and she licks it off, where the Brood is attacking the daughter, and where the daughter is showing the same aspects of her mother in the car. You're playing up to 3 big scenes. It's like, where the hell did this come from? Because Cronenberg, I wouldn't say he's sick, but, he's had like a lot of, like, look at Crash, like that body horror, sexuality. Or like when he played the character in Last Night, The End of the World, he's still doing his job at the end. And eventually gets shot at the end, and it's pretty weird. But The Brood, I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, if you can stand horror, that's fine. But this is psychological horror. If you're going through a massive divorce, or gone through a massive divorce, or had a big breakup, or you're like a virgin at age 19 or 17 or whatever, you just broke up with the person that took your cherry, this is not the movie for you. This is not a date movie. This is not a couples movie. This is not a movie that should be watched without a psychiatrist nearby. Because I can see it because I get Cronenberg. But if you've never seen any of Cronenberg's movies before, and you look at The Dead Zone, which was kind of, there's some body horror in too, because the Art Hindle lookalike, there's a scene, anyway, I'm not going to give it away. This movie is not for anybody but someone that has their head on their shoulders. That's why this movie has never been any bigger, because the person went to theater to watch it. I don't remember this being any major theaters on the North Shore that I was going, because back in the day, I was at the Paramount in Campbellton, the Capitol Theater in Dalhousie, the Bar Drive-In, the Lower Bar, and the Mountain Drive-In up in Adderville. I don't remember this being even talked about. I don't even know the Quebec Centres would allow this in New Brunswick or the Maritimes. Like I said, if you can find a copy of this, but I'm just saying, the Canadian no style really gets the creeping terror. It's like England in the 1970s. And Oliver Reed, again, a hero in previous ones, he plays the villain. That really messes you up. Samantha Hagar, who would be like like an ingenue or a romantic comedy in modern day. But Art Hindle, of all people, being the evil father, or being the father that keeping his wife in that mental asylum. But it's a, put it this way, I produced this movie, it's my fault. Us and the 20 million plus people that produced the movie. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I produced The Brood. It's my fault. So if you like what we're doing here, give us a like, comment, or subscribe. No American can say, oh, we helped produce Scream or helped produce Exorcist. One of the greatest horror movies of all time came from the pockets of kids buying chocolate bars for 25 cents with 2 cents in each chocolate bar going for tax. They produced it because it went into the kitty that the federal government was giving money, like Telefilm Canada is doing now, to support these productions. So again, I produced it. It's my fault. If you have any trouble, give me comments and I'll send you your 2 cents back or whatever. Well, if you're a Canadian, I'll give you 2 cents or 5 cents, whatever you paid in 1979 or whatever. Thanks for listening. Bye.